And now, All the Dirt, gardening tips and advice, sponsored by Farm Credit and the Turf and Gardening Store.
And once again, good afternoon. I'm Tab O'Neill. Thank you for choosing to spend some of your time with us this afternoon. Scott Baker is with us. You know him. He's been on the show a lot. Extension agent with the Virginia Cooperative Extension. And what we're talking about today, this is our Hurricane Awareness Week as well. So I thought, okay, we got potential of hurricane remnants coming into our area later on during the course of the season this summer. What happens if we get some of those heavy storms in our area on top of our gardens?
Sure, yeah. I'm glad to talk about that. Thanks for having me. So many times we think about all the other things about gardening, the planting and whatnot, seeds and fertilizer and disease and pests, but not what the weather can do to us. So we want to put that into our planning process because we're going to get severe weather. We always do. So as it relates to heavy rainfalls, a few things that people can do. Probably the number one thing that people can do is have their garden well mulched. It provides that barrier between the soil and that water that's going to come down really hard. It has multiple benefits.
Now, one of the things I thought was interesting, we were talking before the show, is that you actually, if you don't have the mulch there, that heavy rain can come down and it can compact the soil.
Right, and with our clay type soils, it's even more likely to happen. So that's one benefit for sure.
And of course, soil erosion would be another thing.
Yeah, soil erosion would be another thing, and it also avoids the soil splashing up onto the leaves, which, even though it's not related to the weather per se, that can increase the likelihood of disease spread.
Now, are the challenges different, and I'm going to presume that they are, between having an in-ground garden and a raised garden? It seems like you might be able to manage the water a little better or a little differently in a raised bed.
Yeah, that's right. It's certainly going to drain better. So, you know, our soils being clay-based, they're going to hold that water longer. So if we have a raised bed with different growing media that we brought in, it's going to drain away faster, and that's going to help mitigate that heavy rainfall.
One of the things I was thinking about is the water that is around the garden. For example, we might have downspouts coming off of the roof, and that downspout just pointed straight toward a garden area.
Right, and when we get one of these really, really hard rains, if you've got any kind of roof at all, that's going to collect a lot of water and shoot it right into the garden. So again, that's part of that planning process. You know, take a walk about on the property and see if there's things that you can, you know, redirect or redesign.
You know, talk about redirection. If we've got a little irrigation ditch, or we might have some kind of a drainage ditch or something, if we're really looking at the potential for some heavy rainfall, I don't know, some bales of straw or something along that, between that and the garden area to help protect.
Yeah, if you've got the straw in hand, great. But you can, you know, you can use other things in a pinch. You know, if you've got some logs that are hanging around, or, you know, rocks, or anything that's going to slow that water down.
Yeah. Speaking of logs hanging around, I want to jump to our next subject here. It's protecting gardens from damaging wind. I'm going to go down the list here a little deeper here, but when we think of damaging wind coming in, we probably need to take a look at the trees and the foliage around our gardens and make sure to prune away any weak or dead limbs that could come down on our gardens.
Well, that is surely true, and you know, that makes me think. I'm thinking about where my garden is and a large tree right next to it. I need to go home and check that myself.
Now, what about supporting taller plants? Is there a way to actually do that?
Sure. So it's a good idea to support these plants regardless, because we don't want them falling onto the ground even in regular times, because that can increase the likelihood of disease and rot and that sort of thing. So depending on the plant, you know, you certainly can use tomato cages or trellising, or, you know, even just ropes tied around, say if you're growing sweet corn, which tends to go rather tall, something that will give it some of that support that you need.
Either use, I'm thinking of those green stakes and put a green fencing post in the ground right there, because you can just hammer that on down in. That gives you some extra things to tie off onto.
Yeah, just anything that gives it support.
I've got some potted, for example, I've got a bamboo tree, not bamboo, an olive tree that's in a pot. So I'm thinking I could try to drag that inside, but maybe just lay it over some of the tall plants that might be in pots that are mobile. I can actually lay them on their sides.
Sure, and for a short period of time, like you would need to do, that's going to be just fine. You stand them right back up after the storm passes.
Yeah. Garden fencing, most of us have some kind of fencing around the garden to keep the predators out. We're going to want to make sure that's secure, because we don't want that fencing sweeping through the garden during a windstorm.
Well, and that's right, and a lot of us are using electric fencing to keep the critters away, so we want to be thinking about that in these heavy storms that might contain lightning. Probably the best thing you can do, because you want to protect that electric controller that can be quite expensive, is just unplug it, disconnect it from the fence, let the storm pass, and then reconnect it.
Scott, thank you so much. Appreciate you coming in again.
Great. Always glad to talk gardening.
And of course, we're always here for you with All the Dirt. You can find us online, WFXRTV.com. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.